off a daily fantasy. His numbers too high, then I'm probably fading him. He been on the road, he gon' eat up my salary. I hit up by, he gon' lie before lock. Play back to back, then I probably won't pick on the DFS bachelor, good as it gets. Build a few liners and hit me a leg. He had a good game, but it might be a trick. Log in the Slack so I know who to pick. Sharing our liners, we all gon' get rich. New to this game, you should come to the pad. You might want some cash and get a good laugh. DFS sports, we gon' run up a bag. He heard every game and it's making me mad. You buying your lineups, I think you a cheater. DFS bachelor, he the new leader. Yeah.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Bachelor Pad. I, of course, am your host of DFS Bachelor, and I know it's late, but I did say I would get this XFL Week 2 video out Thursday night, so it's about 10 o'clock on the West Coast, so we are getting our XFL Week 2 DFS plays for both Fanduel and Draftkings. First things first, thank you for all your support. I truly do appreciate it. Making me a part of your day every day is truly humbling for NBA, etc. Everything that we do, I truly do appreciate it. We are now officially in the NBA All-Star break, so our next video after this will be our Window Liquor Awards for the first half of the NBA season. I don't think I'm going to do an All-Star Game DFS video. I might if there's like a high demand for it, but it's kind of silly. It's kind of a ridiculous game, so I probably won't do that. So our next video will be that, but I just appreciate all your support. I really do. Thank you all so much. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Be sure to hit subscribe down below. Get access to all of our content. Fantasy Draft, NBA, Fanduel, Draftkings, NBA, XFL, all sorts of stuff right around the corner. And don't forget to check out our Window Liquor Awards. Of course, for all injury information, etc. that comes out, you can follow me on Twitter at DFS Bachelor. Also, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment in the comment section below. You can qualify for our weekly $25 PayPal giveaway. That is sponsored by Draft Dashboard, and I will announce that winner, our first NBA video, possibly XFL next week. I'll have that figured out by the Window Liquor Awards show, so be sure to comment and subscribe with that. So, XFL Week 2, Week 1, I thought it was okay. We had a good week in terms of how everything went DFS-wise. We had a great week. A lot of things that we thought were going to happen, so that was good. Now we have a much better indication of what's going to happen, so I think we can have a nice, clear kind of path towards everything. And soon on Draft Dashboard, we should have XFL tools up as well. I know that is being worked on as we speak. So we're going to go position by position. First, let's start at quarterback. At the top, we got Philip Walker. He's 10-6 on DraftKings, $23 on FanDuel. Don't forget, FanDuel's kind of doing the Yahoo pricing, so it's a little bit different. Obviously, he's the most expensive player on the slate. They are playing at home against St. Louis, who was the number 1 passing defense in the league, or number 2, I should say, last week, allowing the second fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. But again, it's a June Jones offense. They're going to throw the ball a ton. I love Philip. The Houston Renegades are my favorite team. I decided that before the game. I'm not just on the bandwagon. I love the old Oilers logo. I'm down with the Houston Roughnecks. June Jones is going to throw the ball a ton. Big-time rushing upside. He was the number 1 quarterback last week. Philip Walker. Love Philip Walker, even if it is against St. Louis. They are at home again, one of the teams in the league to get to play 2 home games straight away. Explosive offense, tons of opportunity. Gotta love the upside for Philip Walker. Much more expensive this week than he was last week when we also suggested playing him, which turned out to be the money play. Right before that, 10-4 on DraftKings, $18 on FanDuel is Josh Johnson. He did not play last week. They put in that little bitch, Chad Kanoff, who was a little punk. One of the cool things about the XFL is you get to hear kind of the interactions between the players, coaches, etc. And I have never wanted to bitch slap someone more in my life than that little punk Chad Kanoff. If they ever let that kid take the field again, that's a fucking disgrace. I could not stand that kid. So Josh Johnson, it looks like he's going to play this week. He's got a high rushing upside. They're playing Dallas at home, a game they need to win. They already fired their defensive coordinator. There's all sorts of hell breaking loose already with the LA team. But St. Louis torch Dallas with Jordan Tiamu. Josh Johnson has that same kind of rushing upside. He's a little bit cheaper, 18 on FanDuel, 10-4 on DraftKings. I like Josh Johnson a lot this week. Next, Landry Jones, another quarterback, another NFL veteran, another one of the guys they kind of expect to be the face of the league, along with Josh Johnson, who didn't play last week. He's back this week. He's $9,500 on DraftKings. I think that's a low salary. 19 on Fanduel, playing on the road in LA. Look, this is a Bob Stoops, Hal Mummy offense. They are going to throw the ball a ton. LA already fired their defensive coordinator, Pepper Johnson, so there's a lot of problems there. They allowed the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks last week. Of course, that was against Philip Walker, who torched him. The Dallas offense threw the ball a lot last week, but it was, Philip Nelson doing his best Alex Smith impression, throwing the ball 2 yards at a time. You would expect this week that there would be a more explosive passing game. That's certainly what they're expecting there in Dallas. Landry Jones, I like the price for him on both sites. Next for Seattle. Now, this is not a guarantee. Brandon Silvers has not practiced all week, and he got benched a little bit last week. He got knocked out. He barely beat out B.J. Daniels for the starting job. B.J. Daniels is $8K on DraftKings. It's very cheap. $14 on FanDuel. He's got that similar type rushing upside that Jordan Tiamu has. Tampa Bay gave up the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks last week. I kind of like the rush. If Brandon Silvers is out for Seattle, again, you can follow me on Twitter at DFS Bachelor, and BJ Daniels takes over. I mean, nothing happened last week that would make them, happy to keep Brandon Silvers in the lineup. He didn't play that well. It looks like he got upgraded to probable. Let me take a look right here. He's being listed as probable. So forget BJ Daniels. It's going to be Brandon Silvers. So that's that. That news just came out right now. Aaron Murray just got announced out as well for Tampa Bay. So we're getting kind of like live updates right now. Normally I would just start this over. So forget BJ Daniels. Forget all that. Silvers is listed as probable and is going to play. So that answers that question. We'll just skip right on past that. Jordan Tiamu, $8,900 on DraftKings, $20 on FanDuel against Houston. In Houston, it's a fast-paced offense in Houston, so it should mean extra possessions for St. Louis. And it should mean St. Louis is going to have to score a ton of points. Jordan Tiamu looked good throwing the football last week. He looked great running the football last week. Love the upside for Tiamu. I think he's still too cheap on DraftKings. FanDuel figured it out and put him up as as the second most expensive quarterback this week. I like Jordan Tiamu a lot. That Houston-St. Louis game should be a lot of fun. Quentin Flowers. So we're just now finding out Aaron Murray is definitely out this week. So that doesn't necessarily mean Quentin Flowers is going to start, but he's going to see the field quite a bit, just like you saw last week when Aaron Murray was healthy. Quentin Flowers, $7,500 on DraftKings, $18 on FanDuel. Taylor Cornelius will probably be the starting quarterback with Aaron Murray listed out. He's the one listed as number 2, but I would expect Quentin Flowers to see quite a bit of the action. He's going to be running the ball, throwing the ball. Could be an interesting GPP upside type guy against Seattle, who wasn't great last week, allowed the second most, against Seattle, who allowed the third most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks last week. No Aaron Murray with that foot injury. Quentin Flowers is in. Could be a nice value on DraftKings. So let's go over that again. BJ Daniels, ignore him. He's out of here. When I made this sheet, Brandon Silvers was still listed as questionable, not practicing. So forget the Seattle quarterbacks. I'll pass on that. But Walker, Johnson, Jones, Quentin Flowers, interesting value. Jordan Tiamu. I love Jordan Tiamu as well. Matt McGloin against DC. I just think New York and DC are two of the better defenses, so it could be tough sledding for both quarterbacks, Cardell Jones and Matt McGloin. But of course, they're certainly in play this week. Let's go to running backs. If there's one thing that we learned from running backs last week is that paying up a ton of money for running backs is not the way to go. The running games for basically every team looked dreadful. St. Louis, it was still the quarterback position and multiple running backs, etc. So I'm just not trying to spend a ton on running backs. James Butler for Houston wasn't even listed as the starter. Andre Williams actually started the game like they said. He had like 1 carry, 1 catch. And then, boom, it was the James Butler show. He's $6,300 on DraftKings, $19 on FanDuel. He's going to be involved in the passing game. He had a receiving and a rushing touchdown. I like James Butler this weekend, and what I think is going to be the best game of the weekend. Next, one of the running backs, and especially now with Aaron Murray being ruled out, the Tampa Bay Vipers are going to turn into more of a running team. De'Veon Smith was clearly their number 1 back. He had 16 carries. They were getting blown out in that game. They only scored 3 points, and they still stuck with him in the running game. Now with Aaron Murray out and Quentin Flowers, Starting at quarterback, I think De'Veon Smith at 7,500 on DraftKings, 17 on FanDuel. Probably, in my opinion, right now, the second best running back option of the day, because the first running back option for me is Lance Dunbar, 4,600 on DraftKings, $15 on FanDuel. Now, he's sharing the backfield with Cameron Artis-Payne, but he had 6 targets and 6 catches. He's going to be heavily involved in the passing game. He's a pass-catching threat, just like he was with the Cowboys. Lance Dunbar is too cheap, in my opinion, at 4,600. He and De'Veon Smith, my top 2 running backs. I do like James Butler third, but St. Louis's defense looked like it was for real last week. That's going to be a ball control offense, but we'll see if they can contain that Houston Roughneck offense. That's going to be a fun game. I cannot wait for that game, but I love Lance Dunbar. So let's get to St. Louis, another one of the running teams in the league. The problem right now is that both Matt Jones and Keith Ford have not practiced all week long. Let me see if there's an update, because all of a sudden now they are on Update Central. No, they're both still questionable. So that could clear the way for the biggest window licker in week 1, Christian Michael, of course. This guy sucked, fumbled the ball, had negative fucking points. He was the most expensive running back, looked like the clear-cut number 1 running back for a running team in St. Louis. Well, now, if both Matt Jones and Keith Ford miss, it's just him and Lawrence Tillery. Christian Michael could be in for a heavy workload if both Matt Jones and Keith Ford do not play. If Matt Jones is healthy and ready to rock and roll, he's the running back you want for St. Louis at 5,900 on DraftKings. I think he's 17 on FanDuel. But Christian Michael is 5,300 on DraftKings, 13 on FanDuel. Keep an eye on this injury situation with St. Louis. And one more running back I want to talk about, one of the offensive captains for Seattle, is Kenneth Farrow, 6,100 on DraftKings, $15 on FanDuel. Now that Brandon Silvers is starting, it's going to be more of that passing game that you saw last week. But Kenneth Farrow, even though Traquan Gardner and Trey Williams are going to lead the way in terms of the depth chart, Kenneth Farrow was the one who led the team in carries. Now, Trey Williams did have 5 targets and have the rushing touchdown. He's 5K on DraftKings. But Kenneth Farrow kind of did a little bit of both, was their most efficient runner. I like Kenneth Farrow's price this week. Let's move on to wide receivers. So, I thought since wide receivers are essentially where you're trying to target, wide receivers, tight ends are all listed in one position. We're going to go team by team, game by game, cover each team's wide receiver situation, who the top targets were for each team. We got a pretty clear indication of who's going to do what after 1 week. Of course, things can change. I mean, it's very, very early in the season. It's very, very early for this league. These guys have only been a team for less than 2 months. So there's still going to be some growing pains. So I do think we have to give them a little bit of leeway here. So let's go over that. So for New York, we'll start right here on the Saturday game. First team, New York at DC. For New York, their top targets are going to be Colby Pearson, 7,200 on DraftKings, 17 on FanDuel. Heavily targeted. They went to him downfield. He got in the end zone. Of course, you can go to him. Mekeel McKay is another big play guy. He's 10-2 on DraftKings. I think that is way too expensive. Now, they are going to target him. They're going to go to him in the passing game. He was targeted, 4 times last week, 3 catches, 58 yards. I don't mind Mekeel McKay. I just think it's a bit too expensive on DraftKings. 16 on FanDuel, big play upside. Again, against a tough DC team who gave up the 3rd fewest points to wide receivers last week. Then you have Joe Horn Jr., who I think is way too cheap. He might be my favorite value play this week, or certainly one of them. He is 3,400 on DraftKings. He had 8 targets last week. He was iffy going into last week if he was going to play. Now, he only converted 2 catches for 27 yards, but it seemed like every time he turned around, he was throwing the ball to Joe Horn Jr. 3,400 on DraftKings, $14 on FanDuel. I love that price for him. And if you get down here to their tight end position, we thought it was going to be E.J. Bibbs. Well, it turns out it's not. It turns out it's Jordan Powell. They're going to go to him in the red, or Jake Powell, excuse me, Jordan Powell. They're going to go to Jake Powell in the red zone. He had 6 targets last week, which was tied for the team lead, 28 yards. They were going to him in the middle of the field. Big target. I like his price as well. 3,200 on DraftKings, $13 on FanDuel, the red zone threat. So Pearson, McKay, Horn, Powell, those are the targets I like for New York. If we go to the other side of that game, we go to the DC Renegades with Cardale Jones at quarterback. We know Rashad Ross is going to be the downfield threat. 9,900 on DraftKings. He's still too expensive. He was only targeted 3 times, but they are going to use him as their deep threat and go to him down the field, so he's got the big play upside. 9,900 on DraftKings, 1,800 on Fanduel. Next, Eli Rogers, former Steeler. He was targeted. He was the main target. 6 targets, turned them all into catches, had 73 yards. He's 9.7 on DraftKings, $17 on FanDuel. Now, one big thing to keep in mind is going into the week, Eli Rogers was listed as the number 3 receiver, and DeAndre Tompkins was listed as the number 1 receiver. Tompkins is 3,600 on DraftKings, 12 on FanDuel. He's supposed to be healthy this week. He did have a good camp, so it wouldn't surprise me, especially there's just not a whole lot of other wide receivers to really like on that team. I mean, you can go to Keenan Reynolds, who had 5 targets, etc., but it wasn't the greatest output. Tompkins going back into the starting lineup could be an interesting value guy as well this week. It's certainly something to keep an eye on. Kahari Lee, the tight end, had some big plays. Simi Cobb's 1 catch. So it's a really iffy situation with wide receivers there after the top 2. So Tompkins, who was listed as a starter before week 1, didn't play because of injury, back this week, listed as probable, should make an impact with that team. They did throw a pass or 2 to Malachi Dupree as well if you are really desperate for that DC passing game. Let's go to Tampa Bay. So, Aaron Murray, out. That affects the entire passing game. And it's kind of a shame because even though Aaron Murray and Tampa Bay only scored 3 points last week, their wide receivers still put up great numbers. They had great value. Dan Williams was the number 1 receiving yardage wide receiver in the XFL last week. He's 7,600 on DraftKings, $19 on FanDuel. Now with Quentin Flowers, they're going to be more of a running team in Tampa Bay, so it does make things a little bit more murky for these wide receivers, but you had Dan Williams, who played great. Jalen Tolliver had 8 targets. He's 3,900 on DraftKings, $16 on FanDuel. And Reese Horn, 3 big receivers. Reese Horn, 3,800 on DraftKings, $13 on FanDuel. He was targeted, 5 times last week? 6 times? 5 targets, turned 3 of those into catches. They were going to Reese Horn. Their tight end, Nick Truesdell, was targeted 6 times. He did have the fumble. He's 6,700 on DraftKings, $14 on FanDuel. The wide receiver core for that team, for me, is sort of off limits. I might go to some value with Jalen Tolliver, who was targeted 8 times last week. 8 targets is a lot. Again, different type of passing game now with Aaron Murray out. Let's go to Seattle. So one of the biggest stories of last weekend was Ricky Proehl's son, Austin Proehl. Had 10 targets, 5 catches, 2 touchdowns. He was the number 1 fantasy wide receiver last week. He's 9,200 on DraftKings, $20 on FanDuel. And good news for you, for those of you who want to play Austin Proehl, with Brandon Silvers being healthy and looking like he's going to play, he was the quarterback whom was throwing the ball to Austin Proehl. Now, it wasn't a great week for Seattle last week, and he got hurt, so he could have a shorter leash. Remember, that was a very competitive preseason quarterback battle or camp quarterback battle, whatever you want to call it. So it is something to keep an eye on, but Austin Proehl should remain in his usual role, 10 targets last week. The other receivers you're looking at, Keenan Reynolds, he's 6,300 on DraftKings, $17 on FanDuel. He had 7 targets last week. He's listed as a number 1 receiver. He's certainly in play. And Dontrez Bird for some value. He's 3,800 on DraftKings still, very cheap, $14 on FanDuel. He was targeted 5 times last week, went to him a couple times in the red zone, turned 2 catches into 32 yards. As these teams work together, things could pick up there. Those are the top targets for me for Seattle. Let's move on to Dallas. The big story for Dallas's passing game is the return of Landry Jones. So guys like Jeff Badette, who is the number 1 receiver for the team, 8,700 on DraftKings, $15 on FanDuel. He was only targeted 4 times last week. It was a couple short catches, but remember, it was Philip Nelson doing his best Alex Smith impression. So I do think guys like Badette has a bigger upside this week, making things a little bit more exciting in that Hal Mummy passing game, Hal Mummy, Bob Stoops passing attack. Next, for me, Flynn Nagel. Again, LA allowed the most fantasy points in the league to opposing quarterbacks last week. Again, they played against Philip Walker, so that makes sense, but they showed vulnerability in that secondary. Pepper Johnson fired as a defensive coordinator, so certainly some turmoil, if at best, with that defense in LA. Flynn Nagel, 5,200 on DraftKings, $16 on FanDuel. He was targeted 6 times, had 6 catches, was our number 1 receiver. I like Flynn Nagel. And then the player that they really liked to go to last week was Donald Parham, the tight end. 3,200 on DraftKings. Very, very cheap for Donald Parham. He's a huge tight end. He's like 6'8". They're going to go to him in the red zone. He had 6 targets. He's only 3,213 on FanDuel. Come on, that's way too cheap. He turned 6 targets into 4 catches for 40 yards. 6'8" tight end. Come on, sign me up for that. And of course, he was iffy going into last week. He ended up playing. I think Jazz Ferguson could be very interesting. He's still hauled in 3 targets. He's $5K now on DraftKings, $12 on FanDuel. He could be an interesting low-owned option at wide receiver this week. So let's go to LA. Again, LA should have a better situation at quarterback this week in Josh Johnson. So that could mean he goes to different receivers. Now, Nelson Spruce was absolutely terrific for everyone involved last week. Led the league in targets, led the league in catches. He had 15 targets, turned it into 11 catches. He's $10,400 on DraftKings, $20 on FanDuel. We'll have to see how he gels with Josh Johnson, because remember last week it was Chad Kanoff, that little whiny bitch. At quarterback, Nelson Spruce put in a huge game. There's no reason to believe he was very productive in the AAF. Had an excellent training camp last year with the Rams. Nelson Spruce is an excellent play this week. And really the other person that you wanted to go to here, the only other person I have much interest in, is Jordan Smallwood. He's $6,900 on DraftKings, $18 on FanDuel. He was targeted 7 times last week. He's got some big play upside. He also got into the end zone last week. I think Jordan Smallwood could be interested. Some other guys who got some targets for him. LaDamian Whitfield had 3 targets. He turned that into 30 yards. He also fumbled once. Adonis Jennings had a few targets. He's listed as a number 3 receiver. He is minimum salary, 3 targets, only had 1 catch for 10 yards. But again, they should be more efficient now with Josh Johnson back as their quarterback. Let's go to St. Louis. So we all know St. Louis is going to be a running team. Jordan Tiamu is a running quarterback, but he also had a fairly effective game with a few wideouts. Pearson L., who we talked about last week, is also their punt returner. 4 targets, 4 catches. Now, the highlight was his 41-yard catch. He's $8K on DraftKings, $16 on FanDuel, 4 catches, 64 yards. He has some upside in the return game as well. Alonzo Russell, $4,800 on DraftKings, $18 on FanDuel, targeted 5 times, also caught his touchdown. A very fast, big play upside type receiver. I do like Alonzo Russell as well. They also went to their tight end, Marcus Lewis, $4,600 on DraftKings, $15 on FanDuel. He was targeted 6 times. I don't mind that either. And then, of course, I don't know why I have LaDamian Washington. He is, I know I talked about him on LA, but he's not on LA. That is Whitfield, who was targeted 3 times. My bad. LaDamian Washington is on St. Louis, $4,400 on DraftKings, $13 on FanDuel. He had 5 targets last week as well. That's it for the LA passing game. That's it. One thing to keep an eye on is Blacknall, who had a few targets, 4 targets last week, just couldn't bring any of them in. He hasn't practiced because of a thigh injury, so a guy like Adonis Jennings could see even more targets. Their tight end, Brandon Barnes, he could be interesting at $5,500 on DraftKings as well. Let's move on to Houston. My favorite team in the league. I love this passing attack. They have 5 legit playable wide receivers. So obviously last week it was Khalil Lewis and Cam Phillips. Khalil Lewis, $8,900 on DraftKings, $18 on FanDuel, had 6 targets, brought in a touchdown. Cam Phillips, $8,400 on DraftKings, $19 on FanDuel. He was targeted 9 times, brought in a touchdown. He's my favorite Houston wide receiver. Sammy Coates. Let's talk about Sammy Coates. Big expectations coming in. They really, really tried to get him the football. He was targeted 9 times, can only convert that into 2 catches, had a couple drops on some big plays, but there is absolutely no doubt they are going to give him a chance at a big play. So he's certainly in play. You can't turn away from 9 targets. $9,500 on DraftKings, $17 on FanDuel. Gotta love Sammy Coates. Lewis, Cam Phillips, we talked about both of them. I love both of them. And then they have this young guy, Mobley, Sam Mobley, who is probable. He was a limited participant in practice. They threw a couple balls to him down the field. He converted one of them into a 39-yard touchdown. So he's a boom or bust GPP guy, $3,413 on FanDuel. And then the other player to receive multiple targets, who's super cheap, is Raheem Malone, $3,900 on DraftKings, $11 on Fanduel. He had 5 targets, 4 catches, turned it into 18 yards, breaks a tackle or 2, converts that into a few more yards. I think he is in play as well. There's all the wide receivers. When we go to defenses right now, as you look, the best 2 defenses from last week are playing each other, New York and DC. I do like the Seattle defense, could be a sneaky defense with the iffy quarterback situation in Tampa Bay. Neither offense looked great last week, and now you have Quentin Flowers, who's going to be more of a running type quarterback. And when that offense did move the ball last week, it was when Quentin Flowers was on the field. Don't be surprised if you see him on the field as well as Taylor Cornelius at quarterback. They'll have both quarterbacks on the field. They did that quite a bit last week in Tampa Bay with Aaron Murray. But when you're going to a backup quarterback, all the injuries, the Seattle defense is minimum salary. They could be an interesting defense. The Tampa Bay defense against a shaky kind of situation there with Brandon Silvers. I don't mind that either. I think that's where I would draw the line. I'm not much interested in the other defenses. I might take a shot on Houston at home. If we've seen anything, it's that these quarterbacks are going to make mistakes. There's going to be the opportunity for turnovers. So that's our look at XFL Week 2. I hope that was thorough enough. Sorry for the shaky start at the beginning with the quarterback news. It all came out right as I started to record, so that was interesting. But thank you all so much again for all your support. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, be part of our weekly PayPal giveaway. I appreciate you all very, very much. May the fantasy gods be with you this week. We'll see you next week for our Window Liquor Awards show, and then when, of course, NBA starts back up on Thursday. So thank you all again so much. Good luck this weekend. Goodbye, folks.